Fellas, which fighter should we be keeping an eye on in 2024? I'm going to be answering that question in this video because I'm going to be going through every single card that has been either rumoured, announced, leaked by the UFC, and picking one fighter from every single card that I think we should specifically be keeping an eye on, a fighter that I think has great potential in the UFC, and I guess you can say a prospect that I think should have a ton of hype to them. Maybe some of them you've heard of, maybe some of them you're not so familiar with, but I'm going to be going through every single card, picking a fighter that I think we should be keeping an eye on. We'll start off with this weekend with Perez versus Taira. Now, I have chosen two fighters for this card because it's a really good card, this. Now, the first fighter I've chosen, and I'm sure you've heard of him, Ikram Aliskerov. Now, Ikram Aliskerov, he's got a record of 15 wins and 1 loss, and that one loss was to Khamzat Chimaev. He got KO'd by Chimaev in a different promotion a few years ago, so it's not like he lost to a bum, so there's no shame in losing to Chimaev. He's also got some notable wins at UFC 294. He was able to KO Wally Alves. He's also been able to KO Chinny Phil Hawes. But the reason I've chosen Ikram Aliskerov is because he's one of my favourite prospects, not only on this card, but in the entirety of the middleweight division. You know, we've got guys like Roman Kopylov and Bo Nickel, but I think what separates Ikram Aliskerov for the rest of them is because I really do feel like he has potential to climb the rankings. He's super well-rounded. He's technical and dangerous on the feet, and also when it comes to grappling, he's able to latch up submissions like it's nothing. He's really, really well-rounded, is Ikram Aliskerov. And I'm just saying, there's a reason the UFC match-made this guy against Paulo Costa and Anthony Hernandez in his third fight in the UFC. Now, he is going to be fighting this weekend, like I said, in the co-main event, and he's going to be taking on Antonio Tricola, and it is just going to be another flash finish for Ikram Aliskerov, in my opinion. So, this is a fighter that we need to be keeping an eye on. He's super fun to watch, but he's also super dangerous, so I've got to include him. And then the second fighter that I've chosen for this fight night this weekend is the headliner of the prelims. I think he's the headliner of the prelims anyway. He should be on the main card, but it is Joshua Van. Joshua Van is one of my favourite flyweight prospects right now. He's got a record of 10 wins and 1 loss. He hasn't really got any major notable wins right now, but it's the fashion that he's getting these wins. Now, the thing about Joshua Van is he's got super crisp, high output striking, but what separates him from a lot of the flyweights is because he also hits really hard. Now, a lot of flyweights, they tend to have good striking, good boxing, but they don't really tend to hit that hard. Now, Joshua Van, he has the full package. He's crisp, he's high output, and he also hits really hard for a flyweight. He's also really good in the clinch, I've noticed, and he has a really good, bright future in the flyweight division. If he's able to beat Tagirol and Benkov this weekend, I'm excited to see what the UFC have planned for Joshua Van, because he's a great flyweight prospect that we should all be keeping an eye on. So those are the two fighters that I've chosen for this fight night this weekend. And then the week after that, we've got UFC Saudi Arabia. I cannot wait for this card. Now, there is a ton of fighters that we should be keeping an eye on, but the first one I've got is Rinat Fakhretdinov. Now, Rinat, I've chosen him. I mean, he's 22 wins, 2 losses, and then 1 draw to Dos Santos. Now, the reason I've chosen Rinat is because I don't know if you lot remember, but last year, this guy absolutely mutilated Kevin Lee. Dropped him, found the submission, and put him out cold, and has essentially just shut down the return of Kevin Lee. He's also got a good decision over Brian Battle, but the reason I've chosen Rinat is because before, and now in his last fight, he did have a draw, which technically stopped the winning streak, but before his last fight where he had a draw, this dude was on a 20-fight winning streak. This dude has just been absolutely mutilating every opponent that he goes against. He's an absolute killer, and I think this guy, he doesn't have the hype that he deserves. There's not much hype on this guy, but Rinat Fakhretdinov, I think this guy should have a ton of hype to his name because he's such a killer. He's so dangerous, and he's so well-rounded. So, the first fighter that I think we should be looking out for the Whittaker versus Chimaev card is Rinat Fakhretdinov, and I really do think that he's going to get another finish on this card. Now, I have chosen 2 fighters for this card. I haven't chosen 2 fighters for every card, but I've had to choose 2 fighters for this card because it is stacked. And the second fighter that I've chosen, one that you're probably familiar with, Sharapouti Magomedov. You've just got to include Sharapouti Magomedov, man. Another middleweight prospect similar to Ikram Aliskerov. He's undefeated, 12 wins, 0 losses. Now, he has had 1 fight in the UFC, and he put a striking clinic onto Bruno Silva. Now, the reason I've chosen him is because this might be a bit of a big statement, but Sharapouti Magomedov, honestly, I'm going to go as far to say that he is the most crafty kickboxer in the UFC right now. Whether he's on his back or whether he's just striking you, he's able to find kicks from everywhere. He's an absolutely phenomenal striker, undefeated. And one thing about Magomedov, you know about Dagestani fighters, they're well known for their grappling and their wrestling. Sharapouti Magomedov's put all his eggs into one basket, and none of those eggs are in grappling because he's probably the only Dagestani fighter that actually cannot wrestle. He's such a good striker, and he's going to be fighting again at UFC Saudi Arabia, and I can't wait for him to fight, man. He's honestly one of my favourite to watch on the feet. He's going to be taking on Jolton Lutabach, and he's going to absolutely put a striking clinic on him and potentially get a finish. And I've heard a few people criticise him for not being able to get the finish over Bruno Silva. Mate, even Alex Pereira couldn't finish Bruno Silva, and this guy, trust me, Sharputin Magomedov put a striking clinic. He's got a great Muay Thai background as well. So if you want a fighter to look out for the Whittaker Chimaev card, you should be looking out for Sharputin Magomedov. He's such a good striker, and I can't wait to see him back. And then for the McGregor card, UFC 303, the fighter that I've chosen for this card is Payton Talbott. There's a reason the UFC have put Payton Talbott on such a big audience, and let's be honest, they've put him against a favourable matchup. Now, he's undefeated, 8 wins and 0 losses. Now, his last performance against Cameron Simon was honestly one of the best performances from a prospect. He's one of my favourite in the UFC. Now, Cameron Simon had a lot of hype to his name going into the fight with Talbot. You know, he's a good striker, he's really good. He trains at a good team with Dricus du Plessis. All the hype and all the eyes were on Cameron, but then Payton Talbot goes and spoils the show and puts on a striking clinic. I think he dropped him like 2 or 3 times in that fight before getting the knockout blow. Payton Talbot's an absolute beast. Such a slick striker. A lot of people have compared him to Sean O'Malley. The way that he's just able to land combinations and he's so effortless with everything. And I kind of see the comparison as well. He's also got a wrestling background. He's not just one-dimensional. He has a wrestling background that he had before the UFC and that he's shown some fights in the UFC. And I've just got to include Payton Talbot. I honestly think he's got great potential to climb the rankings of the bantamweight division. He's just really well-rounded and so good to watch on the feet. And that performance against Cameron Simon, he has to make the list. You better be paying attention to this guy on UFC 303 because I can almost bet the house that he's going to get a finish. And then for the fight night that recently got announced between Barber and Namajunas. Now, originally, I was going to choose Christian Rodriguez because he's kind of the prospect killer. You know, he was able to beat Raul Rosas Jr., but his last fight was a bit of a robbery, was Christian Rodriguez, and I just don't know if he can make the list. So instead, for this fight night, I've decided to choose Nazim Sadykov. Now, Nazim Sadykov, he's got a record of 9 wins and 1 loss. Now, he has got some notable wins. He was able to submit Terence McKinney. Now, McKinney's known, or should I say McChinney, is known for getting slept in his fights, but he was able to latch up a submission on Terence McKinney. He's also been able to beat Evan Elder as well. Now, this guy's an absolute monster that has zero hype to his name, but he really should. He's a really, really solid grappler, is this guy. Really, really good. He's just a monster everywhere the fight goes. Even on the feet, he's dangerous as well. And I've noticed that he's got a really good chin as well. He's tanked a few shots in his time, and he's been able to take some big shots, showing that he's got a good chin. So I think for this fight night, we've got to include Nazim Sadykov. We better be keeping an eye on this guy, and he has great potential to be ranked. And I know I'm saying the same thing for every fighter in the sense that they're all well-rounded, but Nazim Sadykov really is well-rounded. But if there's one place you want to be looking out for him, it is grappling. He's a really, really solid grappler, so I've got to include Nazim Sadykov for this fight night. And then a fight night, I don't know if this is the official main event, and it hasn't been confirmed by the UFC, but apparently Amanda Lemos and Verna Jandiroba are going to be taking each other on in a main event of a fight night. And apparently a fight that has been verbally agreed and rumoured to be booked for this card is Joanderson Brito. Well, Joanderson Brito's meant to be on this card, and Joanderson Brito has to be one of my favourite to watch in the UFC now. Yeah, Joanderson Brito, if you watched him at UFC 301, he fought Jack Shaw, and he put on an absolute striking clinic over Jack Shaw, and he's an absolute beast. He has some of the most dangerous leg kicks I've seen in the UFC. He's just a monster, is this guy. And the reason I've had to include him is because of that performance against Jack Shaw. Jack Shaw's a really good fighter, and for Joanderson Brito to go out there and just destroy his leg kicks like that. He's also the only other guy outside of Movsar Evloev to beat Diego Lopez in the UFC. He was able to beat Diego Lopez in the Contender Series. Not a lot of people remember that. He submitted Jonathan Pierce. He's knocked out Andre Tucci-Fili. Joanderson Brito has everything going for a good prospect. He's such a powerful striker. He's able to latch up submissions, and he's finished nearly everyone he's fought in the UFC. And I think he's only one fight away from being ranked. I would argue that he should have been ranked after he was able to beat Jack Shaw at UFC 301. For some reason, the UFC haven't included him in the rankings, so if he gets one more win, Joanderson Brito, it's going to be hard to argue that he doesn't deserve to be ranked, and I think he is going to go on and put on a striking clinic and climb the rankings of the featherweight division. He has great potential, and there's just something about this guy that makes me think that he's going to be champion material one day. So I'm going to include Joanderson Brito for this fight now between Lemos and Jandiroba. And then the next fight card we have is the UK card, UFC 304. Now, the full card has been released for this fight night, and the fighter that I've decided to choose is a British fighter that, again, doesn't really have that much hype to their name, and it is Christian Leroy Duncan. He fought Claudio Ribeiro in his last fight, and he absolutely demolished him. That was one of the biggest, most dominating performances I have seen from a fighter in the UFC. He demolished him and made him look like an amateur. He got the TKO. He's got a record of 10 wins and 1 loss. Now, one thing about Christian Leroy Duncan is he improves a ton in every fight. You look at his first fight in the UFC to now, he seems to be rapidly improving in the UFC, and that is good when you're watching a fighter just improve every fight, because when he's putting up performances like he did against Claudio Ribeiro and still improving, it shows how dangerous he is. He's an amazing grappler. He's super strong, really big for the division as well, and on the feet, he doesn't look that technical, but he's just like a really weird and unpredictable striker. His striking is unpredictable, but it works, and I've just got to include Christian Leroy Duncan. They've given him a really, really favourable matchup for UFC 304, and I'm just going to say, I'm going to bet the house that this guy gets a finish in his next fight. I might even consider deleting the channel if this guy doesn't get a finish in his next fight. That's how confident I am. He really does have ranked potential one day, and I really do think he will be ranked. So for UFC 304, Christian Leroy Duncan is the fighter that we need to be keeping an eye on. And then finally, the final fight card that I have, well, apparently is announced. Well, it is announced. Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov. Now, this card hasn't fully been released yet, but there's been a few fights that have been added to it, and one of those is Alonzo Menifield versus Azamat Murzakanov, and I am including Azamat Murzakanov as the fighter that we need to be keeping an eye on. Now, unlike everyone else in this list, you know, he's a little bit old. I wouldn't really class him as a prospect, but he's undefeated at 13 wins and no losses. He's got some notable wins as well. Dustin Jacoby by decision. He was also able to KO Andre Muniz. A lot of people forgot about this, but he has a knockout win over Andre Muniz a few years back in a different promotion, obviously in a different division as well. But yeah, he's just, one thing about Azamat Murzakanov is he's just super dangerous and powerful striker, and for the light heavyweight division, he has super fast hands. He's just quick, dangerous, and powerful in the light heavyweight division, and that is what, you know, makes me want to keep an eye on this guy in this fight night, because he's going to be taking on Alonzo Menifield, who's just come back of a short notice KO loss to Carlos Ulberg. Now, the only issue with Azamat Murzakanov is his questionable gas tank, but he's a smart fighter, and I think if he cleans up his gas tank, he really does have potential. Well, not even just potential, I really would favour him to beat Alonzo Menifield. So for the Abu Dhabi card, I would go Azamat Murzakanov of a fighter that we need to look out for, but that is every single card and one fighter that I think we should be keeping an eye on. Let me know your thoughts on these takes and these certain fighters. Should I have included any other fighter from the card? But personally, these are the fighters that I think have the best chance of, you know, climbing the rankings and just progressing with their career in the UFC, and fighters that I would call a prospect. So let me know your thoughts on these fighters and this list, and thank you for watching.